You'd think that with $100 billion of spending and $1 trillion of debt, that there'd be an embarrassment of riches in this budget in my electorate, but that isn't the case. Now, some of it, of course, might be secret spending, saved up for those magic election announcements in coming out of a $10 billion slush fund, but let's look at a couple of the key areas that I know my community expects this government to deliver on and where this government has failed. The spend falls well short of not just what people expected, but what the people of the Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury deserve. I'm going to start with childcare. Now, it is always flattering to see a government take large chunks of a policy that we've developed in opposition and present it as their own. So, yes, we're very flattered that occurred. However, you really can't compare the two policies. One policy supports a very small number of families. Our policy would make a difference for 97% of families with young children. So, to start with, you're not comparing apples with apples. So what's different about the policies? Because it can be very easy just to go, oh, it sounds the same, and I want to spell it out. So aside from the fact that Labor's plan helps 97% of families in this country and in the Blue Mountains and Hawkesbury who currently face a real challenge with accessing childcare and affording it. And of course, it's not just childcare, it is early education. And we know how important to have quality early education is. Quite frankly, as a country, it saves us money further down the track, the better our early education is. So our plan, Labor's plan, has a long-term vision that actually provides the structural reform that we need to help people have quality early education for their children and get back into the workforce. Labor's plan doesn't make you wait until you have your second or third child before any savings or benefits kick in. Labor's plan helps every single child get a quality early education and get access to something that they might otherwise miss out on. And I also want to address a myth that the Liberal Party's been peddling, and that myth is that Labor's plan doesn't give as much to low and middle income people. Now, let's be really clear. For every family with one child, which is 75% of families in early education, so 3/4 of families with a child in early education, our plan helps every single one of those families up to a combined family income of $530,000 a year. And in addition to that, if you have 2 children in early education and care, you're better off under our plan. So it's been very disappointing to see that, if someone's going to take your plan, couldn't you at least take all of it? Because our plan was really well thought through and contributes to quality early education and an equity of access for people to be able to have their kids looked after in quality care. So that's the disappointment about the childcare policy, failing to really deliver on reducing the cost of early education to most families. The second area that there were big expectations and big build-up for was aged care. Of course, we've had a Royal Commission, and after 8 years of neglect, people expected and in fact deserve to see some really good commitments here. But the government has failed to take much of the advice of the Royal Commission and the other 21 reports that they've received. So let's look at a few key areas that was covered in this budget. Nothing in this budget will change, nothing in aged care will change without reform to the workforce. There's nothing in this budget to bring about reform to the workforce for the aged care workforce. Nothing to improve the wages for overstretched, undervalued aged care workers. And I speak with them a lot. My father's in aged care. They are really good people. They do a job that I would not like to do. They look after my dad. They give him bright moments in his day, but they know they don't have enough time to spend with him in the way that they would like to and the way that he deserves. And so what this government's done is shirk the key responsibility, and that was the key recommendation to increase the mandatory care minutes in residential aged care. And I'm just going to spell that out so people in detail can hear what was recommended. The Royal Commission had 2 phases in the rollout of mandatory care time. From July next year, the Royal Commission said minimum care time of 200 minutes, 40 minutes of which needs to be from a registered nurse. And that and that's per day, a registered nurse must be on site for a minimum of 16 hours during morning and afternoon. And then there was a second phase where it ramped up even further, and there'd be a registered nurse on site 24/7. So what's the government done? Well, they've accepted this recommendation, but all they are funding is phase 1. And phase 1 won't come in from the middle of next year. It won't be mandatory until October 2023. Now, quite frankly, there are a lot of people in aged care who may not get to enjoy the benefits of this very small improvement. I think that's disgraceful. This is a time when there was a real hope that the government would seriously address such an important issue, and this budget fails. There's also in funding, and this is what the government will tell you, there's extra money for better food. Now, the recommendations of the Royal Commission were a $10 per resident per day increase to the providers to improve the quality of food, the nutritional value, and it's a total cost of $3.2 billion. The Royal Commission was quite specific on what the accountability needed to be for this additional funding. It's a gift to the providers without accountability. And the accountability needed to include that it would be spent on raw food, pre-processed food, bought-in food, kitchen staff and costs worked out across the average number of residents, and that would all be accountable. But in fact, all the government has asked providers to do is to let them know that they'll give an undertaking to report to the government on expenditure of food on a quarterly basis, and that's it. That's the only benchmark you have to meet. So these are fundamental things that ensure the health and the quality of life for elderly people in aged care, where their families have made a big decision to say, we can't look after them in their home, but we'd love them to feel at home in the facility that they're in. Let's talk about those, though, who do want to stay in their home. And one of the other big gaps is the home care package waitlist of 100,000. I've got a constituent right now who knows that her mother requires a higher level of care, but has been told if you apply for more care, you'll just get pushed further down the waiting list, because this government has not addressed the needs of people on the home care waiting list. The recommendation from the Royal Commission is really, really clear. Immediately increase the home care packages available and allocate a package to all people on the waiting list that do not yet have a package, or do not yet have a package at the level that they have been approved for. And that was to be done by the 31st of December this year. So what has the government funded? They've accepted the recommendation in principle, but will only release 80,000 additional home care packages over 2 years, up until 2023. So not enough packages, and blowing out, delaying even further, and honestly making people wait longer. And again, we know some people will not live to get the benefit of these packages. So there's some of the giant flaws in the aged care funding that's been provided in this budget by the government. There are many others, but I want to move on to infrastructure. There was nothing in this budget for my community to bring forward funding for the construction of the North Richmond Bridge. Now, depending on who you listen to, the Morrison government calls it a third crossing. The New South Wales RMS, who's actually building it, calls it a duplication. So I think we know where the spin is there. So this duplication, the planning of it goes back to 2010, when the first federal funds flowed into the New South Wales government to start the exploration of what could be done to alleviate the appalling traffic conditions. Now, we're 11 years on from that. And we still don't have anything. So we don't have a plan. There is no plan. We don't know what this bridge, where it's going to go, what it's going to look like, how flood resilient it's going to be. And remember, this is a duplication of a bridge that went under really fast, only 9 weeks ago. And I think what it shows me, when I made a commitment in 2010, the Gillard government delivered that commitment, even though I didn't win the election. They delivered every commitment I made. There was no underspending in Macquarie because every commitment was met, every single one of them. And the big difference is that this government is very good at making the big promises. You know, you can give them that. They're great at the spin, great at the marketing, but there is no delivery, and that's what we're seeing already, no delivery on this bridge. We should put into context, it isn't just Macquarie where there's no delivery. The budget infrastructure announcements that we're seeing, the chance of them being delivered is so slim. The Morrison government averages an infrastructure underspend every year of $1.2 billion. And in the last financial year, it was underspent by $1.7 billion. So it's hard to even take seriously any of the promises that are made. The one, of course, in Macquarie is $2 billion for the Great Western Highway. Now, that is for roadworks that the Medlow-Bath community don't even want there. They want a tunnel, yet that's not what they're getting funding for. So I think we can pretty quickly say there's not a lot in it out of the infrastructure spend. You know, it's been 8 long years. It's been 8 long years with not only promises not met, things promised and not delivered. You know, a headspace. We are still waiting for a headspace in Macquarie. There's been this promise that some money for extra headspaces might be there. We must be one of the communities at the top of the list needing a headspace. Yet there's still nothing from this government about it, and my community will continue fighting for that. But not only has there been a lack of meeting promises, there's been the record low wage growth. So things are tight. We've had natural disasters that makes things even tighter. And what's the promise in this budget? Well, the promise in this budget is that wages will go backwards over the next few years. Not just that they won't grow, that real wages will actually go backwards. That's the thanks that people are getting. What they're not getting in this budget is any commitment to improve or fast-track the vaccination rollout. Nothing around that. Nothing to make people safer there. Nothing to allow more Australians to come home because we have an effective quarantine program. There are people in my community. I have one family hoping to get their 3-year-old home from India through a very tragic set of circumstances, including their business being on fire. They felt the only thing they could do was allow their grandmother, the child's grandmother, who happened to be out here, to take this child home. But that was more than a year ago, and they've not been able to get permission to get their son back. So, you know, a decent quarantine system would not only alleviate the anguish that families are going through. There are families who haven't seen their children because and in fact some of the kids are saying Australia has abandoned us. They're working overseas, or they had secure work. It's now gone. But they honestly feel betrayed by this government and betrayed by Australia. Now, I'm not the only one in this place who would have spent years of her life living overseas. I've spent 4 years living overseas at different periods in my life, and I never felt that I was locked out from my country. I never questioned that if I needed to be home, I'd be allowed to come home. But that's what we're doing. You know, that's a first. That is a first. And this budget does nothing to give people any reassurance that they will be welcome home. I'm so disappointed by that. I'm beyond angry. I'm at that point of saying I'm almost disbelieving that that could be the case. You know, so while there'll be a lot of talk and a lot of bluster about this budget, I think it's just a disappointing budget, and I know my community is going to be feeling that disappointment.